My sister got pregnant by my boyfriend and he left her. But my parents blamed me for this and sent me away. When I came back for Grandma's funeral, they said, "You're not welcome here." I laughed and said, "Good." Before we dive into the next 30 minutes of a story that shattered every illusion I had about family, about love, and about loyalty, before I share how I walked away from the people who gave me life but never gave me love, would you do me a small favor? Hit that subscribe button. Not because I want numbers, but because stories like mine, and maybe stories like yours, deserve to be heard. And if this story stirs something inside you, maybe it brings back an old wound you never dared to name, or maybe it simply makes you whisper, "I've been there too," I would be so grateful if you'd share it. Because how this story ends? I promise, it's not what you think. And maybe, just maybe, it will make you look at your own family a little differently. Growing up in a small town where everyone knew each other's names but never really saw the shadows hiding behind front porch smiles, I believed that family was sacred, that no matter how flawed, how loud, how suffocating they could be, at the end of the day, they would have your back. I believed that love meant loyalty, and loyalty meant forever. And I clung to that belief like a lifeline, like the only thing that made sense in a world that often didn't. Especially when I met him. He wasn't the town's golden boy. He wasn't the guy everyone expected me to bring home. But he made me feel seen in a way no one else did. He whispered promises in the dark, promises about forever, about building a life beyond the town limits, about choosing each other over everything and everyone. I thought he was mine. I thought we were writing a story together, one that would outlast the smallness of the place we grew up in. But stories, they don't always follow the script you write in your head. Sometimes, they twist and turn in ways you never saw coming. And for me, that twist came the day I found out he had been seeing my little sister behind my back. The girl who used to sleep in the same room with me, who shared my secrets, who cried on my shoulder when boys broke her heart, she was now the girl carrying the child of the man I loved. And you know what hurt the most? It wasn't the betrayal itself. It wasn't the whispered lies or the stolen moments. It was the moment I turned to my parents, expecting at least an ounce of outrage, a drop of sympathy, some parental rage on my behalf, and got nothing. Worse than nothing. They blamed me. They said if I had been a better girlfriend, if I had been more attentive, if I hadn't been so wrapped up in my own ambitions, maybe none of this would have happened. That was the day I learned that in some families, loyalty is a currency only the loudest, the most manipulative, the most broken know how to spend. And I was the easy scapegoat. The black sheep. The one they could shove out the door and sleep better at night telling themselves they did the right thing. And so, they sent me away. I wish I could tell you that when I walked out of that house, I walked with my head held high, that I slammed the door behind me with the kind of righteous fury that belongs in books and movies, but the truth is far less glamorous. I left with my shoulders hunched, my hands trembling, and my heart dragging behind me like something half dead. There was no suitcase waiting at the door, no one handing me a check for a fresh start. Just silence. And the bitter taste of a home that no longer wanted me. I remember standing outside on that cracked driveway, the same driveway where I learned to ride my bike, where my dad used to wash the car on Sunday mornings, where we used to chalk out hopscotch squares and argue over rules. And now, it was just cold, gray cement. An exile ground. And me? I was the unwanted. You see, they didn't just send me away. They made it clear that from this moment on, I was no longer a part of the family narrative. They rewrote the story to make me the villain. To make me the unstable one, the dramatic one, the bitter ex who couldn't handle the fact that life moved on without her. And maybe for a brief moment, even I believed them. Because when the people who raised you look you in the eye and tell you you're the problem, it's hard not to wonder if they're right. I left town that night. I didn't even pack everything. Just a duffel bag, a few clothes, some old photos I couldn't bear to leave behind, and the remnants of a girl who no longer knew who she was if she wasn't a daughter, a sister, or a girlfriend. I headed toward a city where nobody knew my name, where I could disappear into the noise, into the neon lights and crowded streets, into the facelessness that, for the first time in my life, felt like safety. But no matter how many miles I put between myself and that small town, between me and the people who once called me family, the voices followed me. The shame didn't disappear just because I changed zip codes. It clung to me like a second skin, whispering at night when the city lights went dim and all that was left was the sound of my own breath, reminding me of what I'd lost, of who I'd let down, of how easily I had been erased. And yet, even in that darkness, even in that suffocating loneliness, a tiny, stubborn part of me refused to die. A part that whispered back, maybe they were wrong. Maybe they were always wrong. But at that time, I wasn't ready to believe it yet. They say rock bottom has a solid foundation, but standing there, in that tiny, overpriced apartment with peeling paint, secondhand furniture, and a fridge that moaned louder than my own sobs, I couldn't feel anything solid beneath me, only emptiness, and the kind of silence that presses on your chest when you wake up in the middle of the night and remember, you have no one to call. I worked whatever job would have me, waitressing, cleaning offices after hours, answering phones for people who never looked you in the eye. I learned to count every dollar, to savor every moment of kindness from strangers, to cherish the small victories, like when I could finally afford my own coffee maker or buy a real pillow instead of using folded-up sweaters. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't the kind of comeback story people like to post about on Instagram. It was messy, slow, humiliating at times. But for the first time in my life, everything I built, no matter how small, was mine. There were nights I'd stare at the ceiling and wonder if they ever thought of me. Did they miss me? Did they sit at the dinner table, feel the empty chair, and think, maybe we were too harsh? But those thoughts, they were poison. And I learned, the hard way, that poison will rot you from the inside out if you let it. So I started turning those questions inward. What do I want? Who do I want to become, now that no one is writing the rules for me? And slowly, painfully, I started filling in the blanks. I took night classes, things I'd always been curious about but never dared to try because someone else's needs always came first. I learned to say no without apology. I made friends, not the kind who needed me to play a role to feel worthy, but the kind who accepted the messy, unfinished, still broken version of me. And little by little, day by day, I started to rebuild, not the life they wanted for me, but the life I wanted for myself. But here's the thing no one tells you about healing, it's not a straight line. There were days I felt powerful, unstoppable even, like I had finally escaped the grip of my past. And then, there were days, a song, a smell, a flash of memory, could send me spiraling back into that cold driveway, that heavy silence, that little girl who just wanted someone to pick her side. And yet, despite the setbacks, despite the ghosts that clung to me in quiet moments, I kept moving forward. Because for the first time, I wasn't running away from them, I was running toward me. The me I was always meant to be, beneath the labels, beneath the lies, beneath the roles they forced me to play. I didn't know then that the past, no matter how far you run, has a way of knocking on your door when you least expect it. I thought I was done with them. I thought I had outgrown the need for closure. But then, the call came. And everything I thought I had buried, came rushing back. It had been nearly 2 years since I last heard any of their voices, and honestly, I had convinced myself I never would again. I told myself that chapter was closed, that some stories didn't need sequels, that I was done bleeding for people who wouldn't even notice if I disappeared. But life, well, life has a cruel sense of timing. The phone call came on an ordinary Tuesday, the kind of day where the sky is clear, the world feels stable, and you almost start to believe that bad things only happen to other people. It was my uncle. His voice cracked in a way I didn't recognize at first, until the words hit me like a punch to the chest. Grandma had passed. Peacefully, he said, in her sleep. She was gone. And in that moment, all the walls I had built, all the distance I had placed between me and them, crumbled. Because she wasn't just family. She was my anchor, the one person who, even in the chaos of our broken family, had always made me feel like I mattered. She had been the one who taught me to bake cookies when I was little, who told me bedtime stories no one else had the patience for, who called me her girl when everyone else called me the problem. She was love, in its purest, simplest form. And now, she was gone. For days, I wrestled with myself. Part of me wanted to stay away, to protect the fragile peace I had finally carved out for myself. But the other part, the little girl inside me who still clung to the memory of warm hugs and whispered prayers, she needed to say goodbye. She needed to stand at that grave, not for them, but for her. And so, I packed a bag. This time, it was heavier, not because I carried more things, but because I carried more weight. More history. More scars. I told myself it was just one day. I'd show up, pay my respects, leave before anyone had a chance to reopen wounds that had only just begun to scab over. But as I pulled into that old church parking lot, the one that hadn't changed in decades, something inside me tightened. The same chipped bricks, the same wilted flower beds, the same familiar faces now 2 years older but still wearing that same judgment in their eyes. I hadn't even stepped out of the car, and already I felt like an outsider in a place that once felt like home. I walked in anyway. Because sometimes, closure isn't about making peace with others, it's about making peace with yourself. And yet, I was naive to think they would let me have even that small mercy. I should have known better. I should have prepared myself for the cold stares, the whispers that silenced when I entered the room, the way people I had once called family turned their backs as if I were nothing more than an unwelcome ghost haunting their carefully constructed narrative. But no matter how much you brace for it, no matter how many times you rehearse the indifference in your mind, when it happens, when you feel the weight of 100 eyes judging you for breathing the same air, it still cuts deeper than you expect. The church was full, every pew lined with faces that used to feel familiar but now looked like strangers wearing masks of grief and righteousness. And there, at the front, was my family. My parents, my sister, all dressed in black, all performing the perfect portrait of sorrow, of unity, of the kind of family they always wanted the world to believe we were. And me? I stood alone at the back, like an outsider at someone else's funeral. I tried to keep my head down, tried to focus on Grandma, on her gentle smile, on her stories, on the love she had poured into me when no one else did. I told myself that this wasn't about them. That I was here for her, and only her. But they wouldn't even let me have that. When the service ended, I made my way toward the casket, wanting one final moment, a silent goodbye, maybe even a whispered apology for not being able to protect her from the storm that had become our family. But before I could reach her, they blocked me. My father, standing like a wall between me and the only person in that building who had ever truly seen me. "You're not welcome here," he said. Not shouted. Not whispered. Just flat, emotionless, like it was a fact written in stone. I remember the way the air left my lungs in a rush, the way the room tilted, not because I was surprised, God, no, I wasn't surprised, but because even after everything, some part of me still held on to the foolish hope that death would soften them, that loss would make them human again. But it didn't. They made their choice. And this time, so did I. I didn't cry. I didn't beg. I didn't explain myself like I used to when I was younger, desperate for them to understand me, to love me, to see me. I looked him in the eye, the man who had once carried me on his shoulders, the man whose approval I had wasted years of my life chasing, and I laughed. Not because it was funny. But because it was tragic. Because it was pathetic. Because it was the only response left when all the tears had dried up and all the bridges had already burned to ash. "Good," I said. And in that word, in that breath, I set myself free. I turned and walked away, not just from them, not just from that church, but from the last remnants of a life that had never truly been mine. And as the doors closed behind me, I realized, sometimes, the only way to win is to walk away without looking back. I used to think that walking away meant losing, that it meant surrendering, admitting defeat, giving the people who hurt you the satisfaction of watching you shrink into nothingness. I thought the strong ones stayed, fought, clawed their way into being heard, into being seen, into being loved. But standing there in the parking lot, the cold wind biting through the thin fabric of my dress, I realized that sometimes, walking away isn't weakness, it's the bravest, fiercest thing you can do. Because walking away means choosing yourself over the need to be understood by people who never tried to understand you in the first place. It means refusing to fight battles that drain you, in wars that were never yours to win. That word, good, it wasn't just defiance. It was closure. It was me finally, after years of carrying their rejection like an open wound, stitching it shut, letting the scar be enough, letting it remind me of where I've been without letting it define where I'm going. And for the first time, I didn't feel like a victim of their cruelty. I didn't feel like the abandoned daughter, the betrayed sister, the discarded girlfriend. I felt like someone reclaiming her story, like someone rewriting the ending in her own words, on her own terms. I walked away with nothing in my hands, but everything in my heart. That night, in the quiet of my apartment, I sat by the window, watching the city lights flicker like tiny promises in the dark, and I let myself grieve, not just for Grandma, but for the version of me that had spent so long begging to be chosen, to be enough, to be worthy. I grieved for the birthdays missed, the holidays spent pretending I didn't care, the phone calls never returned. I let the grief wash over me like a wave, not fighting it, not drowning in it, but letting it cleanse the last of the guilt they had tried to brand onto my skin. And when the tears finally stopped, when the ache dulled into something softer, something almost peaceful, I realized that by saying, good, I hadn't just walked away from them, I had walked towards something bigger, something freer, something that didn't require their permission. Because the truth is, family isn't defined by blood or by tradition or by the stories other people try to write for you. It's defined by love, by respect, by the people who see you at your worst and still choose you. And sometimes, the hardest thing you'll ever have to do is accept that the people who should have loved you the most never will, and that's okay. Because you can still choose yourself. And in that choice, there is a power they will never understand. Life after that day didn't magically transform into some neatly packaged fairy tale where everything made sense and every scar faded into soft memories. No, it was messier than that, lonelier at times than I care to admit, and yet, in that mess, in that wide, terrifying space where there were no more expectations to meet, no more roles to perform, no more masks to wear, I found something I had never truly known before, freedom. The kind of freedom that comes not from running away, but from running towards something better, even if you have no idea what that looks like yet. I started writing again, not about them, not about the pain, but about the small, ordinary beauty I saw in the world around me, in the way strangers smiled without knowing my story, in the laughter of friends who didn't care about the broken chapters of my past, in the mornings when the sun came through my cheap apartment blinds and made everything look golden, even the cracks. I rebuilt my life, piece by piece, with trembling hands and a heart that still flinched at loud noises, at unexpected kindness, at the echo of words I no longer allowed to hold power over me. And as I built this new life, I learned that home wasn't a place, or a house, or even a family by blood, it was the people who showed up, who stayed, who made space for all the versions of me I was still becoming. People I met in the most unexpected places, a coworker who noticed when I skipped lunch, a neighbor who left cookies at my door on Christmas Eve, a friend who sat with me in silence on nights when the weight of old ghosts pressed too heavily on my chest. They became my family, not because they had to, but because they chose to. And in that choice, I found more love than I had ever known under the roof of the house I was born into. I stopped explaining my story to people who didn't deserve to hear it. I stopped trying to fix relationships that were never meant to be fixed. I stopped chasing apologies that would never come. Instead, I gave those things to myself. I wrote myself the letters I wished they had written. I spoke the words I had longed to hear. I looked in the mirror and chose, every day, to love the woman staring back, even when she still looked a little lost, a little bruised, a little unsure. Because healing isn't about pretending the past didn't happen, it's about making sure it doesn't get to dictate your future. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, the girl who once stood trembling on that driveway became a woman who stood tall, who walked into rooms without apologizing for existing, who laughed loudly, who loved fearlessly, who forgave, not them, but herself. And that was the greatest rewrite of all. I thought I had closed the chapter, sealed it tight with the kind of resolve only time and hard-earned distance can give you. I told myself that their world no longer intersected with mine, that I had built walls too high for their voices to ever reach me again. But the thing about the past, the thing no one tells you, is that it has a way of slipping through the cracks when you least expect it, dressed in new clothes, wearing new faces, but carrying the same familiar ache. It came in the form of a text message, a number I hadn't saved but recognized instantly because no matter how many times you delete someone from your phone, your heart still remembers the pattern of their presence. It was my sister. After all this time, after all the silence, after all the years of pretending I didn't exist, she reached out with words that at once felt both desperate and rehearsed. Her life had unraveled. The boyfriend, the man who had once been mine, who she had chosen over me, over everything, had left her. She was alone now, a single mother, abandoned in the same small town that had once banished me. And she wanted, what? Sympathy? A sisterly shoulder to cry on? Redemption? She didn't say it outright, but the words between the words begged for something I no longer had to give. For a moment, I froze, the old instincts tugging at me like frayed ropes, the part of me that had always been the fixer, the peacemaker, the girl who would have dropped everything to save the people who had never once tried to save her. But that girl no longer lived here. I had buried her the day I walked away from that church. And though the ache of her voice stirred something soft and fragile inside me, I knew better now. I knew that answering that call would not heal the years they had stolen from me. I knew that rushing to her side would not rewrite the past. I knew that sometimes, not responding is the loudest answer you can give. So, I didn't reply. I didn't pick up the phone. I didn't send comfort or anger or anything at all. Because some doors, once closed, need to stay closed. And while the guilt tried to creep in, wrapping itself around my chest like it always did, I let it sit beside me without inviting it in, without feeding it, without letting it devour the life I had worked so hard to rebuild. I reminded myself that I was not her savior, not her solution, not her sacrifice. I was just me. And that was enough. Sometimes, the most radical act of self-love is choosing silence. Not because you're bitter. Not because you want revenge. But because you finally understand that peace is something you owe to yourself, not something you earn by rescuing people who once threw you to the wolves. And in that quiet refusal, I found a new kind of freedom, one they could never take from me. In the days that followed, I half expected the guilt to grow louder, to claw its way back into my chest, to remind me of the stories we're told, especially as women, that no matter how deep the betrayal, no matter how wide the scars, we are supposed to forgive, to nurture, to show up, to fix what's broken even if we had no hand in breaking it. I braced myself for the old voices, the ones that whispered I was cold, heartless, selfish. But strangely, they never came. Or maybe, they did, but this time, I didn't listen. Because what I had finally learned, what took me all those years to understand, was that guilt is a tool people like them use to keep you tethered to a story that never served you. And once you stop playing your part, once you let yourself step off the stage, you see it all for what it is, a performance designed to keep you small, obedient, afraid. And I was done being small. I was done carrying the weight of choices that were never mine to begin with. I was done making myself bleed to make them feel whole. So instead of guilt, I chose peace. Not the kind of peace that comes from pretending it never happened or from forcing a smile at family dinners where no one says what they really mean. No, I chose the kind of peace that comes from truth, from boundaries, from knowing that you can love someone and still choose to love yourself more. I chose the kind of peace that doesn't need anyone else's permission, the kind that doesn't crumble when they call you names or rewrite the story to make themselves the victims. I chose the kind of peace that lets you sleep at night. And in that choice, I found something more precious than any apology they could ever offer: clarity. The clarity that my worth was never tied to their acceptance, that my story didn't need their validation to be real, that my life, messy, imperfect, beautiful, was mine to write. And so, I kept living. I kept laughing. I kept loving. Not them, but me, and the people who had shown up when it mattered, who stayed not because they had to, but because they wanted to. Every time the past tried to knock, I let the silence answer. Because sometimes, silence is the kindest, most powerful response you can give. I sometimes wonder if you were in my shoes, standing there in the parking lot of that old church, with the people who should have protected you turning their backs once again, would you have said, "Good too"? Would you have laughed, not because you found joy in the rejection, but because you finally realized you didn't need their acceptance to breathe, to live, to be whole? Or would you have stayed just a little longer, hoping, pleading, waiting for them to change, to see you, to love you the way you deserved all along? There's no shame in the answer. We all carry different wounds. We all have different breaking points. Some of us need to stay a little longer to learn. Some of us need to walk away sooner to survive. But if this story has shown me anything, if these years of unraveling and rebuilding have taught me anything, it's this: sometimes, the most powerful word you can say to the people who broke you is not, "Why?" or "Please," or even, "I forgive you." Sometimes, it's simply, "Good." Because that word is more than an ending, it's a beginning. It's the door you close so you can finally open another. It's the breath you take without them in the room. It's the life you build without waiting for their applause. And maybe you've been holding your own version of good inside you for years now, afraid to say it, afraid of what comes after. If that's you, I hope this story gives you permission to say it, to choose yourself, to walk toward a version of peace that doesn't require anyone else's permission. And if any part of this story felt like a mirror, if it echoed a chapter of your own life you've kept locked away, I'd love for you to share it in the comments. Not for me, but for the you who needs to speak it aloud, who needs to know they're not alone. And if you're ready for more stories about reclaiming your voice, about rewriting the endings they told you were written in stone, I invite you, gently, humbly, to subscribe. Because sometimes, hearing someone else say, "Good," is exactly what we need to finally say it for ourselves. And when you do, you'll know what freedom really feels like.